that's my name. Today I'm going to talk about games and social interaction, and yes. All right, so I'm Adriaan. I am a game designer. I can code just enough to make my own prototypes, basically make anything I want. I don't write papers. I don't make games for health or education or social justice, or I'm trying to make the world a better place. I am guilty of making people feel awkward. I co-founded a studio called Game Oven. We are best known for, and I hope audio will work, a game called Fingle. It's basically a game that tricks people into rubbing each other's fingers. And there's this bow chicka wow wow music. Oh yeah. So relationships have been created and destroyed with this game. My lawyer, he actually calls his kid a Fingle baby because Fingle costs more than just finger rubbing. So this is the game we're best known for. We also made this game called Bounden, which is on the show floor there as well. It's a two-player mobile dancing game. It was made in collaboration with the Dutch National Ballet. They made choreography for the game. Yeah, we would fail looking like the Dutch National Ballet playing this game, but it's also really fun being like quirky and yeah, you know, trying to do the dances properly. So this is how you would look if you were Dutch National Ballet, which is nobody. So we also made this game called Friends Trap.
Going for 7 minutes.
Longest I've ever
I never had a friends with benefits. And
I don't think I was ever benefited by any of those friends.
It's a game about talking about weird stuff. Two people hold on to one phone, and when you let go, you lose. There's awkward conversation topics like friends with benefits, invisible hands touching you, awkward silence, giving compliments, your income, dancing mothers, hold your breath, all sorts of weird stuff. It's our least financial success game, but probably our best working game. Yeah, you really get to know the other person better. I've played this game with people, with strangers that I didn't know, and I've walked away feeling that I've made new friends. So this is also Game Oven's last month, which is too bad. But I really needed that to do more experiments with weird, crazy games like these, and not really having this burden of being creatively responsible for all these other people. So yeah, that's Game Oven. That's the games you know us for. Today, I want to talk to you about how games can be about real life things rather than virtual things. So I started making games during my graduation project, I feel, where I wanted to make games that happened outside of the screen. So not really about story or skills or any of the things that most games we know now are about. I wanted them to be about people and the experience of playing the game and having that experience be inside the minds of the people. And I guess naturally I asked myself, like, what makes some games more social than others? Because, you know, social and interaction and people are definitely part of the outside realm of games. I didn't really have any workable answer then, and now after half a dozen games, I still don't. However, I think I'm getting closer. I had a conversation with a friend a couple weeks ago. I said Fingle is more social than Counter-Strike. He disagreed. He thought it was equally social, just in very different ways. One wasn't necessarily a better social game than the other. So yeah, as stubborn as I am, I spent 3 weeks during a vacation to the Philippines figuring out what I really meant. And I think social games really means involving other people, involving their personality traits. So, involving people, involving their personality traits. He was discussing about Counter-Strike being more social than Fingle. Well, this is how I see Counter-Strike. So, say there's a person, he has personality traits, like he hates typing long sentences, or he's a nerd, or he hates the Backstreet Boys, I don't know. And then there's Counter-Strike, and Counter-Strike adds all these personality traits. Skills at aiming, or jumping all the time, or he's familiar with the map. So what Counter-Strike uses is like a mix of these things. There's a bit of you in there, you know, the typing long sentences because you're typing that in chat. But there's also definitely a bit of Counter-Strike in there because there's just no other way to play the game. Now, how I perceive Fingle is, you know, there's, again, the player. And Fingle adds a couple things, like, for instance, being terribly bad at rubbing your fingers into someone else's fingers, or you're a very bad smooth talker during these awkward rubbing moments, stuff like that. But I think there's more personality traits that existed, you know, because of the person, used in Fingle than in Counter-Strike. So it includes more personality traits from the person. Now imagine the following scenario. Wouldn't it be amazing if the game added a very minimal amount of personality traits and the game was mainly about all the personality traits that people already have? And let me take this one step further. What if the game adds no personality traits and it's entirely about the person himself? And, of course, the other self, which is an amazing word. Now, when the game is all about the person, there's nowhere you can hide. There's no way you're going to be unchanged or unharmed by this. And that seems deeply personal to me, because it's all about you. And maybe I make it sound like I'm going to abuse it, you know, making people feel awkward and harm their social status, and you know, you can't hide. But I do think that it can make us stronger, you know. Kids fight playfully, that's of course a very physical thing, but what if we can fight with our social abilities? What if we can become playful about our personality traits? Not necessarily being harmed by, you know, discussions and playing with our deepest faults and fears, but gaining from that. So what I think is that we can make games deeply personal by including as much of the existing personality traits in a game, way more than the personality traits that are added by the game. Now, I've been doing this for a while by facilitating real-life interaction. So let people do some actual social interaction and kind of try to shove that technology in there to kind of check upon it, but also to cause it. And this is where game mechanics come in. So for now, pause this personality in games thing. Let's talk about how game mechanics work and how to include real life in games in the first place. So what are game mechanics? We've all heard about these things, especially when I'm talking to you, you've all heard about game mechanics, but I still need to cover this so we can talk about this. So the game mechanics are the things in games that enable the interaction. They are the things that need input and affect the state of the game. They are the cogs in your game that will only spin if you actually spin them. So you press a button and something explodes, or you know, you could say it's a physical act that triggers an in-game event very directly. And here's a couple of examples that we all know because video games. First-person shooters. You aim by using the mouse. You can look around. You click and you shoot. And often there's also the arrow keys for moving around. Those are the three core mechanics of first-person shooters. Then we have platformers, in which you press left or right. You walk, or you press up, and you jump. And then sometimes there's also action buttons. Same goes for these third-person or bird-eye view games, where you would have a controller, for instance, and you would push the poke to a certain direction, and the character moves towards that direction. A lot of mobile games, they use taps, they use swipes, they drag objects. Those are the core mechanics of these games. And then, of course, maybe the one where all of us are definitely familiar with, a pointer is also a game mechanic. Okay, so listen up. This is really important. What fascinates me about game mechanics is that the player needs to give input to any game. But to do that, the player needs to learn and understand how that input translates to the event. So remember this for now. He needs to understand the game mechanic to be able to play the game. Now I'm going to get a bit more technical now, because I also want to give you some handles on how to make these things. So first I want to talk about how game mechanics work, because it turns out, or I found, that there's some sort of simplification or an abstraction of concept inside this thing that goes from input to the in-game event. And this simple model kind of looks like this. So we can fill this in with all the games that we've seen by looking at what's the physical input of the player, what is the direct result in the game, and that's going to be the event, and what's the abstraction required to connect these two things. For example, we can move a mouse on a flat surface like this, move it left, right, forward, backward. Then there's the abstraction of having some sort of focus point, a virtual presence on the computer. And then there's a pointer that's kind of on a flat screen that goes up and down and left and right. There is a translation there, as you're familiar with. Same goes for a platformer. You press left or right. There's this abstraction of walking, that your walking is always left or always right. That's the abstraction. And then there's a character that walks left or right. Jumping. First-person shooters. There's this weird, so you move the mouse and then there's this weird abstraction of looking around. I don't even know how it works, but I mean, I get it, but I don't know. And then in the game, there's this sort of arbitrary rotation of a camera. Yeah, so that's the core mechanic of a first-person shooter, aiming, looking around. Same couldn't happen with a joystick. Then there's, of course, these are some simpler examples. Pressing a button. You press a button, there's the abstraction of pressing a button, and then you press a button. Same goes for a touch screen. You touch the button, there's the abstraction of pressing a button, and then you actually press the button. And this would be real life finger. You have a real life finger pressing on a real life button, and then there's the abstraction of a button, and you press a button. It makes absolutely so much sense. Now here's the thing. I have found that the less difference there is between the input and the abstraction, and the less difference there is between the abstraction and the in-game event, the easier the message is transferred. So remember that you need to learn the game mechanics in order to play the game at all. What if the game mechanic is the message? So I'm really talking about these jumps or these distances. So going from the input to the abstraction and going from the abstraction to the event. So what if we can make these so small that they are barely there? And as an example, I'm going to just walk you through this. Bennett Foddy was verbally excited on Twitter about this game called Pancake on iOS. It's a super fun little game. You press a button, and basically the pan goes up if you hold it, and it goes down if you release it. Super fun. There's a pancake. You try to flip it as much as you can. Try to make sure that the pancake doesn't fall off, so that you don't lose. So, being a pancake flipping expert myself, I can tell you that this has barely anything to do with the experience of pancake flipping. So imagine the same game, pancake flipping 101, right? But with the game mechanic that actually lets players do this. Right? I could even use my phone maybe as the technology for that. I could even do that. So you look at the pancake from the top, you see the pan from the top, and you try to flip it a bit like that. So would this game be more fun? I don't know. It depends on the execution, I guess. But would this game immerse you more into the experience of actual flipping a pancake? I think so. Because the translation from the input to the abstraction, and from the abstraction to the in-game event is super small, super small. And here, I think that connection between touching the screen and flicking a pen is actually more like this. It comes a long way. So now consider the finger rubbing game that I made, Fingle. Kind of looks like this, the game mechanic. You rub each other's fingers. The abstraction is rub each other's fingers, and you rub each other's fingers. It makes absolutely a lot of sense. Now imagine Fingle with buttons, and you move funny virtual hands. And now the mechanic would look like this. And honestly, I can imagine in my mind these funny-looking hands, but floppy, and you move them inside each other. It's probably going to capture the same kind of awkwardness, right? But I don't think it would be as personal, as awkward, or as much of an icebreaker as Fingle is. I'm not saying the pancake flipping game is a bad game. It's super fun, it's addictive, that was probably the goal of the designer. But game mechanics that contain these huge jumps, I think, are less interesting or less meaningful experiences. Can a first-person shooter ever make you experience the awkwardness of touching each other? Can jumping in a platformer ever learn you anything about math? Can a top-down game with twin-stick controls learn you or teach you to dance in real life? I think most of you would agree that that doesn't really make sense, yet almost all of us are sinners. Okay, so how are we going to make game mechanics with small jumps? That's what I want to talk about. I think where you start is with a vision. First of all, you need a vision or some sort of experience, however much I hate the word because marketing destroyed it, to answer the questions, what do you want the player or the players to feel? What do you want them to experience, him or her? Some examples of visions is make people experience the awkward, nasty, sweaty, touchy-feely of each other's fingers, or make people dance together, or make people talk about random things. Some visions I currently have for projects that I haven't made yet are make people experience what team sailing is like, make people think of their relationship with the other, make people truly interact with music. So this is where it starts for me. Next is trying to find interactions inside this vision. A couple of examples. Touching each other is a very specific interaction, of course. I was also directly inspired by that. But dancing together has a lot of interactions, like, I don't know, synchronously moving your feet, looking at each other, pulling each other, pushing each other, holding each other, lifting each other. I don't know, those kinds of things. A lot of interaction that you can be inspired by. When I want people to talk about awkward subjects, that kind of seems like a very specific interaction, but there's, of course, many ways to talk to each other. You can whisper to each other. You can talk gibberish. You can yell. You can, I don't know, talk in code. Weird ways. In team sailing, there are hundreds of small interactions, I can tell you. There's communication, there's trimming the sails, there is navigation, there's balancing weight, there's a lot of things, looking at, your surroundings, excuse me. And how do people interact with music? Well, they make it, they listen to it, they dance to it. This line of thought actually directly inspired me for a new dancing game 2 weeks ago that I'm currently prototyping. I'm super excited. Okay, so what I'm saying is your vision is guaranteed to include moments in which people or things are interacting with each other. It's guaranteed, guaranteed. Finding these only takes a real good thought. That's really what I found. And what's of course really important is that the interaction that you want to be inspired by is fundamental to your vision. Again, if a player controls your game, and the only way to control your game is through game mechanics, he needs to learn those game mechanics. He needs to understand those game mechanics. So if your game mechanic contains the most fundamental interaction of your vision, then that's exactly what your players will be learning. So, you can't control a first-person shooter in a computer without understanding that you need to move your mouse and that you need to aim around. So once you've got your vision, once you've got a lot of inspiration from interaction, what you need to do is find technology with this interaction. This is technology in the broadest sense of the word. We all know that there's card games, and what are the interactions for card games? Well, people. So it's very, very, it's in broad sense. Say you want people to experience touching each other's hands, you need to figure out how to track this. So that you can generate some sort of output, you can control what they're doing, you can guide them. In Fingle's case, that was the multi-touch screen. For Bounden, I wanted people to move around, found the interaction of people can hold each other's hands and kind of swing it around. And what I found, the technology that I found, was a gyroscope. That's probably in all your phones. For Friendstrap, the mechanic is a bit weird, because the game plays you rather than you playing the game. It just gives you these topics, and then it just lets you figure out the rest. And for visions I still have for games, this is kind of the phase I'm in. Trying to fit the technology with the interactions. Once I've got this figured out, the technology, I do a bunch of prototyping to see whether I can indeed successfully capture it and successfully cause it. And often, this is where a lot of prototypes happen because you just try a lot of things. And if it doesn't work, I'll just throw it out. And if it does work, I'll make a game out of it. So, once you have this game mechanic, you can start building the playground. And the playground is like the levels, the content, the things that you can do with this game mechanic. For Fingle and Bounden, these things kind of flowed naturally out of the game mechanic. But I can imagine that there's often scenarios where that isn't the case and that you're still up for research. Well, game development isn't easy. So, in front of me are you, a group of people that want to change the world. That's, after all, why we're here, to change the real world. We all probably already have visions about health, about education, about culture, about people, about taboo or something you want to fix. If the biggest challenge game developers face today is having an actual effect in the real world, well, this is just one handle, and there is a way to include real life in games beside these virtual things. I think with the right vision and with patience and discipline to search for your vision's interaction, and a connecting technology, we can force people into these interactions by putting these things directly at the very heart of the game, the way that people interact with the game. So, only allowing people to interact with your game in the exact same way that they interact with your vision, for them to learn and understand that interaction, that has an impact. So now unpause personality in games. We can be inspired by interactions between people and make games and make game mechanics with these very interactions. So what I'm saying is, let's bring games back to where they came from, and that is playfulness in the real world between and with real human beings. Thank you very much.